Thank you for attending the virtual Inspiring Abilities Expo. My name is Sarah Cummins and I am the Executive Director for Fuse. I'd like to go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. I apologize for my son in the background. The session is going to be recorded and will be accessible on the Fuse website. So please consider this when you're sharing or asking questions. No, we're going to have room time. Okay, thank you. I also ask you to remain muted unless asking questions. I'll be monitoring the chat box, so please feel free to ask any questions, and we'll let our speaker know when questions pop up. I'm excited to welcome you to this morning's session all about waivers, presented from Carly of the ARC of Indiana. Carly is the director of the ARC Advocacy Network at the ARC of Indiana. Carly is also a mother to a 20-year-old son with autism and anxiety and a 14-year-old son with ADHD. Cannot believe your sons are that old by now. And that 14-year-old also has a wicked sense of humor, according to Carly. So please help me welcome Carly.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me this morning. And Sarah, thank you for inviting me to come talk to everybody. It's wonderful to see all of you. It's still a little strange to be doing all of this virtually, but at the same time, that gives us a lot more opportunity to not only be able to go to different places, but also to be able to access things that we may not physically be able to go to because they're too far away. So really excited to talk with you all this morning. And Sarah's right, we're going to talk about waivers because the reality is when you have a child with a disability, when they are diagnosed, you are given a list of like 983 things to do. And buried in there is applying for a waiver. And sometimes they tell you to apply for a Medicaid waiver, and sometimes they just tell you to apply for Medicaid, which, by the way, is not the correct program. But the thing is, nobody ever bothers to explain what a waiver is. And so you never really realize how important it is or what it can actually do for your loved one. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And by all means, as you have questions, please go ahead and put those questions in the chat. And let me go ahead and share my screen. And there we go. So today we're going to be talking about Medicaid waivers, and we're also going to talk about the LifeCourse Framework. If you're not familiar with the ARC of Indiana, we're an advocacy organization for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. But one of the things that makes the ARC a little unique is that we actually cover the entire lifespan, because there are really wonderful organizations out there like About Special Kids and InSource and absolutely Fuse, where they tend to focus more on children, and goodness knows we need that. But we're also here when they become adults, because that is a completely different world. We are the leading advocacy organization for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families, and we're committed to progressive legislation and public policy to protect the rights and improve services for people with IDD. In fact, the legislative session has just ended, and a couple of the things we accomplished in this session, we were actually able to get a rate increase so that our direct support professionals, the waiver staff that work with your loved ones, will actually get a raise, and the goal is that they will actually be making $15 an hour. The hope is that will actually help with the big workforce shortage that we have when it comes to waivers. One of the other big things that we've done is we helped pass legislation so that schools will actually follow up with students who either left school without getting a diploma, or maybe they got a certificate of completion, to follow up with them for a few years after they've left, to make sure that they know what resources are out there to help them get their high school diploma or their high school equivalency, or to learn about other post-secondary education options, and it's specifically related to employment options and job skill development. We are home to the ARC Master Trust, which is the state of Indiana's largest pooled special needs trust, so that individuals and families can set money aside without jeopardizing their Social Security or their Medicaid benefits. We are the founders of the Erskine Green Training Institute up in Muncie. This is actually a residential treatment, education program so that people with disabilities can learn either the hotel, the restaurant, or the hospital industry. The idea is that they go there, they learn those job skills, they load up on whatever professional certifications there may be, and then go back to their home communities and get real competitive wage, community-based jobs. And then we're also affiliated with the ARC of the United States. So information today is provided thanks to a collaboration with the Indiana Family and Social Services Administration, the Division of Disability and Rehabilitative Services, and the Bureau of Developmental Disability Services, who has as their mission statement that all people are empowered to live, love, work, learn, play, and pursue their dreams in their communities. So let's kind of get into the meat of all of this. What is a Medicaid waiver? Well, a Medicaid waiver is what Indiana calls its home and community-based services. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of like two programs in one, because part of it is Medicaid health insurance. And then the other part are what we call those waiver services, things that health insurance typically doesn't cover, but they're supports and services to help a person with a disability live their best life possible. Now, in order to have a Medicaid waiver, you do have to, you must be eligible for a compatible Medicaid health plan category. I'll get more into that in a little bit. But here's the big thing. Family income isn't considered. So if you think you've applied for a Medicaid waiver before and they told you that you make too much money, well, frankly, you did the logical thing. It's called a Medicaid waiver. You'd think you'd go to the Medicaid office, but no. General rule of thumb, don't ever apply logic to government programs. They don't work and play well together. So when you have a Medicaid waiver, and that's different from just regular Medicaid health insurance, when you have a waiver, they don't look at family income or family assets. They only look at the individual's income and the individual's assets. Now, I'll be honest, Medicaid and government programs tend to use the word resources. I tend to use the word assets, because when I think of resources, I think of things like Fuse, and I think of the ARC, and I think of the Parks Department and the libraries. I think about those things in the communities. When they use the term resources, they mean money. So just want to give you the heads up that I may use a little bit of different language here. In general, a person, in order to qualify for these programs, an individual cannot have more than $2,000 in assets in their names. But there should be a big neon flashing asterisk right next to that, because there are a lot of exceptions to that. First of all, a person can have a special needs trust, and they can have any amount of money in a special needs trust, and that won't count against them. They can have money in an ABLE account. That won't count against them. And then there are all sorts of other specialty accounts and things like that, so that whatever is in those accounts don't count as assets against the individual. So here in Indiana, we have two different types of Medicaid waivers. We have waivers through the Division of Aging, and these are really designed for individuals who have more medical needs. Through that, we have the Aged and Disabled waiver and the Traumatic Brain Injury waiver. Now, here's the thing. Despite the fact that it's through the Division of Aging, and despite the fact that it's called the Aged and Disabled waiver, there's no age limit on those waivers. There are infants who are on the Aged and Disabled waiver. And I will tell you, when you tell a mom of a 6-month-old to call her local area agency on aging, she thinks you're crazy, but it may be appropriate. And I'll get more into that in just a moment. Then we also have waivers through the Bureau of Developmental Disability Services. People call it the BDDS office for short. So if you've ever heard somebody talk about the BDDS office, and here you are furiously trying to Google BDDS to figure out what they're talking about, it's the Bureau of Developmental Disability Services. Because the reality is, we don't necessarily always talk in words. Sometimes we speak in alphabet soup. So that's just one of those things to warn you about. And through the Bureau of Developmental Disabilities, we have the Family Supports Waiver and the Community Integration and Habilitation, or CIH waiver. But let's start by talking about those Division of Aging waivers. The Division of Aging waivers are really designed for individuals who have some pretty significant medical or physical disabilities. The purpose of these waivers is to help an individual with those significant medical needs stay in their home and not go into a nursing home. So most of the services are focused on providing supports in the home. It tends to be a lot of nursing or a lot of personal and direct care. In order to qualify for the aged and disabled waiver, a person actually needs to meet nursing facility level of care. And so there they're looking at things like, do you have a skilled nursing need? So something like a tracheotomy or an unstable G tube, or you need to be on a ventilator, those sorts of things. Do you need help with activities of daily living? Are you able to shower on your own? Are you able to go to the bathroom on your own? Those are the types of things that those waivers look at. Then we also have the traumatic brain injury waiver. And the state of Indiana, for purposes of the waivers, have a very specific definition of what a traumatic brain injury is. In order for it to be a traumatic brain injury for these programs, it has to be some outside force that caused the brain injury. So for example, somebody got into a significant car accident and it caused a brain injury, that would be a traumatic brain injury. If a tree branch fell on somebody, that's an outside force, so that would count as a traumatic brain injury. But if somebody had a stroke, for example, even though it certainly causes a brain injury, for purposes of these programs, it is not a traumatic brain injury. Okay, and so I just want to kind of differentiate that there because it winds up causing a lot of confusion. Here's the other thing. If an individual sustained their brain injury prior to age 22, that interrupts typical development, and therefore it's possible to get them in through waiver programs through the Bureau of Developmental Disabilities. So that's something, you can certainly call us at the ARC, you can call Fuse and kind of talk this through a little bit more to answer your questions, but I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. In order to qualify for the TBI waiver, you either have to meet nursing facility level of care or intermediate care facility for the developmentally disabled level of care. I'm going to be perfectly honest. You don't ever have to know that. You don't ever have to remember any of that, but I want you to know what to expect with that. In order to apply for the Division of Aging waivers, you need to call your local area agency on aging. In the Indianapolis area, that's going to be an agency called SACOA. If you're outside of the Indianapolis area, frankly, the easiest thing to do would be to Google Area Agency on Aging and Indiana. And you'll see a map that actually breaks down the entire state and lets you know who the AAA in your area would be. And that's who you would call to start this process. You simply call them up. You say, I have a loved one with a disability and we'd like to apply for the aged and disabled waiver. Now, the BEADS waivers are very, very different. With the Division of Aging waivers, the purpose was to help somebody stay in their home and not go into a nursing home. With the BEADS waivers, their purpose is to help people with developmental disabilities get out and be as active in the community as possible. So it's a radically different focus on purpose and on services. So these waivers are designed for individuals who have intellectual or developmental disabilities. That can include things like autism, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, but it can also be some of the things that people may not necessarily recognize at first. So things like mitochondrial disorders, genetic disorders, chromosomal abnormalities. Now, I want to say that not every condition that affects a child necessarily falls into the developmental disabilities world. For example, I once had a young man who had juvenile muscular dystrophy. That's not actually considered a developmental disability for these programs, but we were able to get him into services through his local Division of Aging and get him services that way. So just kind of wanted to point that out. And a diagnosis alone isn't enough. You also have to meet a certain level of care. And BEAD staff will determine that by doing something called a level of care screening. That's really about a 1-hour interview where they're going to ask all sorts of questions about what your loved one can do and what they need help with. Then they're also going to review documents like psychological evaluation, medical records, educational records, and the IEP. In order to qualify for the BEADS waivers, first of all, you have to have a diagnosed intellectual or developmental disability or a related condition that was diagnosed prior to age 22. And here's where we've got another issue going on is a lot of times an individual may get And I can't even use the word diagnosed because technically it's determined to have a disability by the school corporation. And that's what makes them eligible for special education services, for example. But a school determination isn't enough. You actually have to have a medical diagnosis. Now, in some cases, you can take that psychological evaluation that the school conducted to your doctor, to your pediatrician or your primary care physician, and they may be willing to make that official diagnosis, that official medical diagnosis based on that testing. But sometimes they may actually recommend that the child go out and get more intensive medical testing to determine whether or not they have a medical disability. The condition must be expected to continue indefinitely, and a person must be eligible for Medicaid in a waiver compatible category. Because believe it or not, there are literally like 20 different types of Medicaid. I'll be honest, when I started this job, I just thought Medicaid was Medicaid. I was wrong. And here's the thing, if this world is still new to you and your children are young, let me just warn you, nothing is ever clear cut. There's never a straight answer, and there are always exceptions to everything. And believe it or not, there are 20 different kinds of Medicaid. Not all of those categories of Medicaid will work with the waiver. So for example, HIP 2.0 is not a compatible type of Medicaid for the waiver. But in order to qualify for a waiver compatible type of Medicaid, the big issue is that once an individual turns 18, the Social Security Administration must determine that they are disabled. So, but again, one of the really nice things is family income and family assets are not counted once you're approved for the waiver. That's how my son was able to have one. So, like I said, a diagnosis alone isn't enough. You also have to meet a certain level of care. And what the state is going to do is they're going to do what they call a level of care screening. That's really about a 1-hour interview where they're going to ask you, and your child needs to be there and be ready to answer questions. They're going to ask you guys questions about what the individual can do and what they need help with. And one of the things I would recommend is that you prepare your loved one in advance for this. Because frankly, it kind of feels bad to constantly say, nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that either. And it just kind of weighs on you. So one of the things I said to my son to make this process a little bit easier when he was going through it, I said, Andy, there are things you need help with, right? And he goes, yeah. I said, needing help? That's not a bad thing, is it? And he goes, well, no. I said, that's what they're trying to find out. They want to know what you need help with so they can give you that help. And once I explained that to him, he was perfectly fine. So, maybe have a talk with your loved one in advance so that they know what to expect and know that it's okay to let people know that they need help with something, because that's really what this is about. And so when they're determining that level of care, they are looking at 6 different areas. And a person has to qualify in 3 out of those 6 areas. The first 3 areas, I got to admit, they're written really simplistically. But I want to go through them so you know what they're looking for here. So the first section is mobility. Can you walk? Can you walk enough that you can walk a full city block? Do you fall? And if you do, how often do you fall? If you don't walk, can you control your own wheelchair? That's what they're looking at in mobility. The next section is language. And I'll be perfectly honest, the way the directions are written, if your child can speak at all, they're not going to qualify in language. Sometimes there's a little wiggle room there. It kind of depends on the evaluator, but that section is written really simplistically. Then we're looking at self-care, things like, can your loved one dress themselves? Can they bathe themselves? Can they go to the bathroom on their own? But here's the thing, when you are answering these questions, you want to answer based on what the individual can do completely on their own. So for example, if you have to get the shower ready so that your loved one doesn't burn themselves, or if you have to walk them through the steps throughout the process, even if they're the one physically doing it, okay, let's put the shampoo in. Now let's rinse it out. Now let's put in the conditioner. If you have to talk them through that, even if they're the ones doing it themselves, they wouldn't be able to do it independently. And so for purposes of this evaluation, the answer is no, they can't do it on their own. Then they're looking at learning. And once upon a time, they were looking strictly at IQ. They're not supposed to do that. And they've corrected that, because with learning, they're looking at things like, Does it take a person longer to learn? Do they need specialized instruction to learn? Can they retain what they've learned and can they generalize what they've learned? So those are the things they're looking at in learning. Self-direction is what I kind of nicknamed the initiation section because it's all about, can you make plans and follow through with them? I love my son dearly. That whole follow through piece just does not happen without supports. So that's what they're looking for in self-direction, is kind of that follow through piece. And then there's capacity for independent living. Now, I want to stress this evaluation, this interview that they're doing, they use the exact same questionnaire for anyone over the ages 6 and up. Okay, so we really are comparing, looking at the skills of a 6-year-old and the skills of a 36-year-old in the same way. And the reason I point this out is that when it comes to capacity for independent living, if your child is relatively young, their age is going to have to qualify them, because I kid you not, some of the questions are things like, can he go to the bank on his own? Can he refill his own prescriptions? Can he make his own doctor's appointments? No, he's 6. But that's what they're looking at there, okay? So the waiver that everybody's getting right now through the Bureau of Developmental Disabilities is called the Family Supports Waiver. And that has a cap of $17,300 in waiver services per year. That's nothing involving the medical side of things, it's just the waiver services. Now, there is a waiting list for this waiver. And because of the pandemic, it's a little harder for me to give a definitive answer on how long that waiting list is. Prior to the pandemic, we were approaching about a 1-year wait. And I know that that's a while, but I will tell you, not that long ago, the waiting list was 15 years long. My son waited for 10 years, and I am grateful nobody has to do that anymore. Right now, the state has, prior to the pandemic, the state was targeting, meaning calling up 350 people off of the waiting list each month. Due to the pandemic, they actually reduced that to 150 per month, in part to make sure that the people who already had services were able to maintain their services during this public health emergency, and in part because a lot of those direct support professionals actually had to leave the workforce because many of them were high risk for COVID, and also because many of them had children who were no longer in school and they had to provide childcare for their own families. So it taxed the system in a lot of ways. So they've reduced how many people they're targeting during this public health emergency. But once that emergency is lifted, and frankly, I kind of expect that over the next few months, once that public health emergency is lifted, they will go back up to targeting those 350 people per month, and get that going faster. Right now, if you ask the BEADS office, they're going to tell you that the waiting list it's going to be about 2 years. I'm a little more optimistic than that because, again, I think the public health emergency is going to be lifted in the next few months. And once that's lifted, I think it will go faster. So I would be comfortable saying it's likely going to be maybe 18 months, maybe a little longer, but just to give you an idea of how long that wait list is. However, we do have 2 priority categories. Individuals between 18 and 24 who have finished school can provide a copy of their certificate of completion or their high school diploma and ask for priority status, which means they jump to the front of the line. And the reason the state did this was because they recognize how hard it is to go from being in school and having all sorts of services and supports to suddenly having nothing. And they don't want that to happen. The other priority category is actually relatively new. It started in October of 2019. And that is that the children of active duty service members and veterans can also request priority status. And the reason the state did this was because, especially when it came to the children of active duty service members, they're moving every few years, so their children are never getting the services and supports they need. So the state prioritized those children so that they can start getting supports right away. All you have to do is provide your DD 214 I have to admit, it was families who taught me that, because I would say there's a paper you need, and they would always just rattle it off the top of their head. They knew exactly what it was. But you can provide that, that document to the Bureau of Developmental Disabilities and request priority status. And again, you jump to the front of the line. Now, we also have something called the Community Integration and Habilitation, or CIH waiver. I will tell you right now, nobody calls it anything but CIH because the name is too darn long. So the CIH waiver has become an emergency-based waiver. In order to qualify for this, first of all, you've got to qualify for the waiver in general, and you have to meet one of the priority emergency categories. But the biggest difference between a CIH waiver and a family supports waiver, that family supports waiver has a cap of $17,300 in services per year, whereas with the CIH waiver, the budget is actually based on the individual's needs. So it's based on their needs, their age, their health conditions, and their living situations. So there are 6 emergency or priority categories for the CIH waiver. The first one is loss or incapacity of the caregiver when there are no other caregivers available. And that's actually a big caveat to this. You know, for example, I'm actually helping a family right now, a young adult with autism. His mom was just placed in a nursing home and is not expected to live. Well, he had a cousin who took him in temporarily, but cousin's moving to Florida next month. So this is only a temporary situation. That would be loss or incapacity of a caregiver with no other caregivers available because he doesn't have any siblings, he doesn't have any other family who can take him in. The next is caregivers over the age of 80. Why did they choose the age of 80? Because that's what we could get the state to agree to at the time, frankly. The state was supposed to reduce that age 1 year for each year that passed, and they never actually did. But it's caregivers over the age of 80. And here's the other part is, it's all caregivers over the age of 80. So if dad is 80, but mom is 76, mom's still under the age of 80, so they don't qualify quite yet. And again, they're looking to see, are there other caregivers available? Because sometimes you may have a sibling who's willing to take over, or a cousin who's willing to take over, in which case they wouldn't wind up qualifying for these priority categories. The next section is extraordinary health and safety risk, and they really do mean extraordinary health and safety risk. The fact that school's over and there's nobody to provide daily care is not an extraordinary health and safety risk. Then we have aging out of a childhood placement by either the Department of Education or the Department of Child Services. So for example, let's say you have a student who was placed at Daymar or at TC Harris for residential placement, and they're aging out of that placement. That would be aging out of a childhood placement and could qualify you for the CIH waiver. If you had a child who was placed in a residential treatment facility by the Department of Child Services, or if you had a child who was a foster child and they are aging out of DCS services, that would be a category for qualifying for the CIH waiver. You also have leaving institutional settings, such as a nursing facility, a state-operated facility, which is the official name for a state hospital, or supervised group living, which is a group home, okay? Once that's a group home to the state of Indiana is an intermediate care facility for the developmentally disabled, or ICFDD. And technically speaking, that is an institutional setting. Now, an ICFDD or a group home is different from a waiver home. And if it feels like I'm splitting hairs here, it's because I'm totally splitting hairs here. But if you have been in an institutional setting for not at least 90 days and you want to transition out of that institutional setting, you could get a CIH waiver to do so. And then finally, the last category is substantiated cases of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. So like I was saying, the purpose of the BDDS waivers are very different. They are designed to help people get out and be as active in the community as possible. They are supposed to be person-centered. They are supposed to be individualized, and they're supposed to help the self-advocate be an active and integrated part of the community. to learn independent living skills. So that's exactly what this is for, is to help them learn how to be more independent, to supplement their needs, and to work toward the self-advocate's vision of a good life. You're going to hear that phrase repeated quite a bit. So one of the things you're going to do is you're going to create a person-centered, individualized service plan. This is the PCISP is a plan that helps articulate the hopes and the desires and the needs of an individual. It describes their life circumstance, and it charts a path for the individualized support team. That's the service providers who work with the individual to follow in supporting that individual achieve their vision of a good life. I like to joke, before we created the person-centered individualized service plan, which is a lot more robust, I used to joke, think IEP without the drama, okay? Because this is really where you're going to talk about what it is the individual wants out of life and how do we help them get that. And the Bureau of Developmental Disability is using something called the LifeCourse Framework with all of their clients. And the core belief behind LifeCourse is that all people have the right to live, love, work, play, and pursue their life aspirations in their own community. And if that sounds a little familiar, yep, Beats totally stole that for their mission statement too, but at least they did it with permission. With the LifeCourse Framework, they have some guiding principles that assist the individual to define what they want and, just as importantly, what they don't want in life, to help determine the individual's strengths, to determine what resources they may already have available to them, especially when it comes to things like technology and community supports and relationships and eligibility-specific programs. It helps identify the individual's vision of a good life and to determine the skills and resources they need to achieve that good life. And they've got all sorts of tools to help with this. And the best part is they're free. And free is always good. You can go to lifecoursетools.com, and not only do they have tons of different tools available, they've also got videos to show you how to use these tools. But the thing with LifeCourse is they break things down into different life stages. So yes, they have materials specifically for early childhood, for those of you who still have little ones. They have materials for school-aged kids, for transition to adulthood, for adulthood, and even for aging, because believe it or not, and this is going to sound a little bit strange, we're just now getting to the point where we're recognizing that we've got to develop some supports for individuals with developmental disabilities who are aging, because they're now living long enough to have age-related issues. You know, nobody ever thought about a person with Down syndrome retiring, or anything like that. So it's just kind of starting to dawn on us, oh wait, we've got to address these needs too. So believe it or not, that's actually a really good thing. We're just still in development a little bit. But not only do they break things down into the different life stages, they also break things down into different life domains. So for example, we have daily life and employment, community living, healthy living, safety and security, social and spirituality, advocacy and engagement. And then they also have resources on supports for the family, and then also integrated supports. And this is something called the Exploring Life Possibilities tool. And so down here at the bottom, you have what we've traditionally done for people with disabilities in the different life domains. So for example, when it would come to daily life and employment, traditionally we'd be talking about sheltered workshops and day programs and work crews. But now we're talking about things like college and training programs. We're talking about things, not just about jobs, but about careers. We're talking about things like micro enterprises, because yes, people with disabilities can own their own businesses. And how do we support them if they want to do that? In fact, I work with a gentleman who has a disability, and for years he owned his own DJ business. He has since sold that off, but we have people who start their own lawn mowing business. So yes, there are ways we can do that. And this is talking about how do we support that? When it came to community living, we would previously talk about institutions, and thank goodness Indiana no longer has any institutions. We would talk about group homes and intermediate care facilities, and now we're talking about things like co-ops and just living in the community, and public transportation, and home ownership, because yes, people with disabilities and people on Medicaid can absolutely own their own home. We've just never really thought about it before. And so these are the types of things to help expand what you may be thinking. So this is another set of tools I like. One of the things that LifeCourse does is they have what are called integrated support stars. And they are there to help you think about what are the resources you've already got available and what are the things you still need. And they break things down into personal strengths and assets, relationships, technology, which is one that is often overlooked, community-based supports, and then also eligibility-specific things. But you see this star and you're like, what am I supposed to put in these things? Well, that's exactly what this tool was designed for, was to help give you some ideas of what kind of goes into those support stars. And this is a 2-page tool because they actually break it down by different life domains. And they try to give you a pretty robust example of what can go in those integrated support options. This is another tool I like. This is called the vision tool. And what I like about this is there's a version for the individual to fill out, and then there's a version for the family to fill out. And I actually recommend that both groups fill these out. And they break it down into the different life domains. And basically, it asks some questions to start prompting some discussions. But the reason I actually recommend that both of you do this is because you would be very surprised at how often what the family's vision of a good life and what the individual's vision of a good life, how often those do not match up. So it's a great way to start some of those conversations. This is one of my other favorite tools. This is called a life trajectory. This is another one of those 2-page tools. And what I like about it is up here in the top right-hand corner, in that big purple box, we've got, what's your vision of a good life? Down here in the bottom, what do you not want in life? Over here on the left-hand side, what are your past experiences that are getting you to your good life? And then in the middle, what are the things you still need to get to your good life? But like I said, just as importantly, what do we not want in life? What's taking us away from what we want? Now, I'll be honest, the first time I sat down with my son to do this, he was a junior in high school, and we were starting to think about, okay, what's life going to be like once high school is done? You know, when the school bus stops coming, we need a plan. And so I was trying to talk to him about jobs and what he wanted to do in his life. And anytime I would ask that question, it went nowhere. I'm sure some of you can relate. And so one day I sat down with him to do this, to use this tool. And I said, Andy, what's your vision of a good life? And he goes, I don't know. And I said, okay. I said, well, what do you want out of life? I don't know. Man, if that child could have jumped up and run away from me, he would have. But I think he knew he'd have gotten in trouble if he did. So I knew that it was going nowhere if I just kept asking him like that. So I changed my tactics a little bit. I said, you know what a good life to me is? I want to go to the movies. And he snapped his head up because he was not expecting that answer. I said, what about you, Andy? Do you want to be able to go to the movies? And he goes, yeah. He so didn't trust that I meant that, but we wrote down movies. And I said, and I want to go to restaurants. My son does not care about restaurants, so we did not write that down for him. I said, what about you? What do you want to be able to do? And he thought for a minute. I want to go to GameStop. So we wrote down GameStop, and we started, doing those things. What were the things that meant a lot to him? One of the things he does through his waiver, he calls his guys' night out. He wants to keep doing his guys' night out. So we absolutely wrote that down. And so as we wrote down these things, I said, okay, Andy, you want to be able to go to the movies and you want to go to GameStop. What do you need to do that? And he thought for a minute. You need money. I said, yeah. How do you get money? And he goes, you need a job. I said, that's right. What kind of jobs do you think you might want to do? And that's how we were able to transition into that next conversation, which was all about employment. And he was doing some classes in high school at the time that were focused on jobs and all that. And so it allowed us to start having that discussion. But that's one of the great things about this tool. But here's the thing, yes, it can be about that big, what do you want in life? Which in all honesty, let's be real. That's really intimidating to think about, isn't it? That's kind of huge and all encompassing, but it can also be, What does a good first year of kindergarten look like? What does a good transition to middle school look like? What's a good freshman year look like? So we can also break it down that way. And even though these tools were developed with individuals with disabilities in mind, these are not exclusively for people with disabilities. Anybody can use these tools. If you're thinking about what you want your next job to look like, especially if maybe you've been out of work during the pandemic, or you realize, oh my God, I'm in a job that I hate, I want to change, these tools can help you too. I joke, one of my colleagues, part of her good life used to say that she wanted the flexibility to work from home. That is no longer part of her vision of a good life. So these grow with you. Now, I said that was a two-part tool, and this is part of the second part of that, which is the more encompassing life portfolio. And here, this part of it is essentially a cheat sheet to your loved one, because up here in the top teal box, it's what do people like and admire about me? Here in this middle orange box, what's important to me? And down here on the bottom blue box, how do you best support me? When was the last time someone ever asked your loved one those questions? Now imagine if you gave that to your child's teachers at the beginning of each year, and they had that information of what's important to your child. How do you best support your child? What are their strengths? What do people like and admire about your child? You just created a great cheat sheet for your kid, and that can help make their life a little bit easier. Now, here's that integrated support star that I was talking about, and this happens to be a blank one, and it's the other part to that life portfolio. And so here in this teal section, it's what are their personal strengths and assets? What are in the orange, or the purple section, it's what relationships do they have? Down here in the green, what eligibility specific programs are available to them? In the, I'm going to say indigo because I have no idea what this color is. It's what community-based resources are available. And then here in the pink, what technology is available for them? But you stare at that star and it's a little intimidating and you think, what am I supposed to put in there? Guess what? They got examples for you. So when it comes to like daily life, for example, what are their strengths? Maybe they've got some volunteer experience. Maybe they have responsibilities at home that they do. Maybe it's that they've got good social skills. What are their relationships? Yes, it's going to be, friends and family and neighbors, and it's going to be, the people from church. And if they're working, maybe it's their coworkers. What are their relationships in life that can help out? Down here in the eligibility specific, yes, of course, that's going to be waivers and voc rehab and maybe special education and things along those lines. With the community resources, that's absolutely going to be things like the parks department and the libraries, and maybe there's public transportation. It's also going to be places like Fuse and the ARC, because those are community resources that are able to help talk you through some things. And it's this technology section that, okay, I totally geek out over, in all honesty, because when we first started talking about LifeCourse and I would think about technology, I would think about things like those gigantic communication devices that Medicaid would buy for people. I didn't think about things like, the calendar app on your phone. But think about it, we all use those. That is essential for our lives. It makes the life of a person with a disability easier too. I didn't think of things like auto bill pay. That makes my life more convenient, but for a person with a disability, that can be the difference between success and failure. I didn't think about auto prescription refill. My son, bless his heart, when he was younger, he would tell us when he was out of his medicine. Heaven forbid he tell us before. Eventually he got to the point where he would tell us a day, maybe two, before he was out of medicine. You know what? We've got all of our medications, frankly, on auto prescription refill. In fact, CVS called me at 9 o'clock this morning to say, hey, you've got prescriptions ready for pickup. That can be the difference between success or failure. And it's things that are just available to everybody. And because it's available to everybody, oftentimes we just don't think about it because we're looking for disability specific things. Remember those things that are just available to everyone. This is another one of those life trajectories. And this one was actually designed to think about respite, because a lot of families want respite services. I think in part because it's the only thing they've ever heard of. So what would respite look like for you? What does it provide for the individual? What does it provide to the caregiver? And what does good respite actually look like? Again, here's another one of those, the portfolio when it comes to specifically to exploring respite. What's going on in my life that I need it? What would taking short breaks help me with? Um, what, what would I do if I had a break from caregiving? What would I do if I had a break from my caregiver? Things like that, just to, again, get you thinking about certain things. Here they've even got a respite support star, because sometimes, you need respite, but you may not need respite. I will be honest, the first time, the idea of leaving your child home alone is really kind of overwhelming. And the first time I left my son home alone, it was not intentional. I got stuck in Castleton, and I think he was probably in second, maybe third grade. I got stuck in Castleton, which is one of the parts in northern Indianapolis, and he was going to beat me home by about 20 minutes. I'll be honest, I was panicked. I may have been exceeding the speed limit a little bit to get home as quickly as I could, but I was terrified. And, especially at that time, my son never talked on the phone. So I'm calling my house and trying to talk to him through my answering machine, because I'm really 85 years old. I still have an answering machine. And I'm telling him, Andy, everything's going to be okay. I'm coming home. It's going to be a little bit, but everything's all right. I'll be honest, I was a nervous wreck. I got home, and you know what I found? He came home, he got an apple, and he turned on the TV, just like he would have done had I been home anyway. He didn't notice anything was different, and the world didn't end. And I realized, okay, he can be alone for 20 minutes on his own. It's all right. And so that happened again a few weeks later, and I realized, okay, I don't need to panic, but I was still trying to talk to him through the answering machine. And slowly I started doing that. And slowly, it got to the point where I realized, okay, he can be home for half an hour by himself. We eventually got it up to an hour. And if that seems scary, maybe it's that you let them stay home while you walk around your block, and you start 5 minutes, build it up to 10, build it up to 20, and slowly build up from there. And don't get me wrong, it was quite a long time before, he was home for any big stretch on his own. And that was mostly because I was panicked, not because, he couldn't do it. It was that I wasn't comfortable with it. The first time we left both of my kids home alone, actually, I think Andy was probably about 16 by then, which meant Michael would have been about 10 or so. And, my husband and I just went out for the day. It was daytime. It was a Saturday. I think I called home about 4 or 5 times just to check in and make sure everything was fine. Yes, they were watching TV and playing video games. Okay, we can get into an issue about screen time if you want to. Personally, I don't care. But it was that everything was okay, and he knew how to make his own peanut butter sandwich, and he knew where to get an apple when he wanted it. Everything was okay. So think about that, because that's also important to help build those skills toward independence. So when it comes to waivers, believe it or not, there are about 30 different services available under the waiver. And here are some of the more popular ones. First of all, there's case management, and that is the one thing that is required for waivers. And I'm going to be honest, the state is about to make some changes to case management. What those changes are, I'm not quite sure yet. They're having a webinar Monday at, I think it's at noon, to talk about this a little bit more. But one of the big things is that this, right before the pandemic hit, the state was about to launch, or had launched, a big waiver redesign effort to make sure that the waivers were actually really more responsive to individuals and families, and making sure that they were meeting their needs, and with the focus on helping the person achieve their good life. And so we had started this, then the pandemic hit. So most of those things are on hold at the moment. They're certainly not giving up on any of those. So when they start having these discussions again, absolutely take part in that, so that they can redesign waivers to actually work for individuals and families. Some of the other really common services are something called PAC, which is Participant Assistance and Care. It's another set of hands to help out with your loved one. Dehabilitation, that is actually We used to have something called community habilitation and something else called facility-based habilitation. What they did was they merged those together and renamed them day habilitation, although you can certainly do them in the evenings too. So the name is a little bit misleading there. But basically, it's anything you want to do. You know, maybe that is going out and taking your child to the movies. Maybe that's helping them volunteer at the Humane Society. Maybe that's taking them to the grocery store and teaching them how to grocery shop. Not because you can't do that, but there will also come a point in time where everything you say is wrong. And when somebody else says the same thing that you've been saying for the last 30 years, suddenly it becomes true. So we have some of those things too. Behavior management, and that doesn't mean bad behaviors. That means learning new ways to do things. So, for example, my son uses behavior management in part to help him learn how to deal with frustration and how to do that appropriately. Music therapy, recreation therapy, adult day services, a lot of different services that are available through the waiver. So how do you apply? Well, the good news is it just got a whole lot easier because back in February, the state made it so that people can now apply for the waiver online. And the website to do that is beadsgateway.fssa.in.gov. There's even an online tutorial to walk you through what to do. It is really easy, okay? I want to stress that. It really is easy. The hardest part of this is remembering that when it asks about you, it doesn't mean you, it means your child. And yes, they really are asking the marital status of your 6-year-old, because up until a few years ago, it was mostly adults who were applying for this program. So that's the only thing to keep in mind is when it asks, how does the disability affect your life? They mean, how is your child's disability affecting your child? When it's asking what is the highest level of education you've achieved, they really do mean your kid. So that's going to be grade school or high school, and it's got breakdowns there. That is the hardest part. That and knowing the last 4 digits of your child's social security number. Anytime the state is looking somebody up in their computer system, they do it by name, date of birth, and last 4 of their social. So I'll be honest, I never knew that for either of my kids until my son started the waiver. And yes, I know the last 4 digits of his social security number off the top of my head. So you might want to memorize that just to save yourself a little time and headache. If you're not sure whether or not you have applied for the waiver, there's actually a waitlist web portal where you're going to put in your child's name, their date of birth, the last 4 digits of their social security number. You'll put in your name and who you are in relation to them. And then if your child, a couple of things will happen. What should happen is your child's information will come up, so will your contact information. And if they're on the waiting list, you should see something that says an application date. That tells you, yep, you are on the waiting list, you are just fine. If I were to do that right now for my son, I would not see an application date because he's already in services. Okay, so you won't always see that. If you thought you were on the waiting list and you don't see an application date, call the BEADS office just to double check, because we might have, there may have been some paperwork that was missing or something might have gone sideways. Give them a call and just double check there. Sometimes though, somebody will think that they've applied and you put in their information and nothing shows up. If nothing shows up at all, you're not on the waiting list and we need to fix that, okay? And you want to make sure that you keep your contact information up to date, because BEADS will always send things to you by US mail. So you want to make sure that they've got your most recent address too, okay? So what can you do for help right now? Well, first of all, think about what you need and what you want and what your dreams are. And that's where those LifeCourse tools can really come in to help. And also to help you think about what resources may already be out there to help you with some of those things while you're waiting. Pandemic aside, maybe one of the things that you want for your child or that your child wants is to learn how to cook. Well, guess what? There are some cooking classes available through the library or through the Parks Department. Some stores will actually have demonstration-based cooking classes, and some of those are free. Some have a charge. So you want to think about those types of things too. And there may be some other programs depending on your loved one's age and certain situations. So for example, vocational rehabilitation services. That's a state agency whose whole purpose is to help people with disabilities find jobs. And in fact, if they're between 14 and 24, they may be eligible for something called pre-employment transition services, which are some services to help get ready for the workforce. It could be possible to get supplemental security income through Social Security to help with some basic living expenses. I will warn you that if we're talking about a child under the age of 18, unlike Medicaid, when you have a waiver, Social Security will absolutely look at family income and family assets. So I want you to know that ahead of time. There could be other medical supports, other community programs, and other natural supports out there to help too. And a lot of community programs. So things like, faith-based organizations and the YMCA. A lot of YMCAs have adaptive programming if necessary. We've got Self Advocates of Indiana and Special Olympics. By the way, Special Olympics typically starts about age 7. So I know we've got some families with younger kids on here. Want you to know that too. Could be things like Best Buddies and service organizations. And you don't have to stick with disability related programs. If you've got a child with a disability who loves to bake, by all means, have them take a cake decorating class at your local Michael's. Or if you've got a child who's crafty and likes to knit, for example, there are groups out there who knit baby blankets for babies in the NICU, or who make quilts for service members, or whatever the case may be. Things don't have to be disability related. Make sure that you're getting them involved in as many typical community activities as possible. But I want you to know that we're here to help. So first of all, if the information you've heard today is different from other sources, it could be that information has actually changed. And especially since this is a recorded presentation, and we're going to be making some changes to waivers, it could just be that information has updated. And it could be that the other person you've talked to wasn't aware of some of these updates. But whenever you have questions, we are here to help. You are welcome to call any of us at the ARC of Indiana. All of our family advocates are parents, so we actually live this too. I know Fuse is the exact same way. So by all means, give us a call at the ARC, contact Fuse, and that's exactly what we're here for, is to help people through all of this confusing information. You can sign up for our e-newsletter and our action alerts, especially our legislative action alerts. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we have various podcasts and videos. Again, you can reach us at 317-977-2375. And at this point, I want to stop my screen. I know we are running real close on time, so I don't know if we have time for questions right now or not.
So it looks like Jane said, great job in explaining. I apologize about Miles. To parents and caregivers on applying as soon as diagnosed. I'm always amazed how many families are not told to apply, don't know anything about the waiver. And I think we all probably feel that way every time we hear that. And it's the quickness of that. So
yeah. All right.
Thank you all. I do need to scoot out, but I appreciate this, and hopefully if I can share the recording with families, then that's what I'll do, because I even had someone call the other day, and it was a grandmother who said her daughter was told, oh, it's income based. And I said, no.
Yep. Like I said,
Okay.
She did the logical thing. It's called a Medicaid waiver. She went to the Medicaid office. And on my good days, I recognize that we have about 35,000 people on waivers in the state of Indiana, whereas we have 1.3 million people on Medicaid. So we literally make up like 3% of what they do, and we break all their rules. That's why they look at us like we have 3 heads. So like I said, on my good days, I remember that. On my bad days, I don't care. Just fix it. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming today.
Carly, we did have a question on the Q&A for the app. It says, has there been any movement? I don't know if you've addressed this, any movement to the hold on changing the levels of the CIH waiver since they tabled it right before COVID?
Yeah, as long as we are in this public health emergency, all that's kind of on hold right now. It's not that they are certainly not abandoning it by any stretch of the imagination. But right now they're focused on getting through COVID and making sure that things go well. I will say, you know, Indiana has actually done a really good job. And I know it's been frustrating, don't get me wrong, but you know, one of the things we saw here in Indiana is that Indiana did a much better job than other states at keeping people with disabilities safe. Yes, we had individuals and services who got COVID. Yes, we had some who passed away from COVID. Not anything like some other states had. So you know, I am actually really encouraged, and they really were trying to do everything possible to meet people's needs. And when they got feedback that something wasn't working, they were quickly making efforts to that too. So it's on hold for the moment, but it is absolutely a priority for them.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for addressing that question as well. And thank you so much for giving us all this information. We are so excited to be able to pass that along to everyone within the state of Indiana. And who knows, other states too. I mean, they might want to learn about Indiana. Who knows? Maybe they're moving and find this on YouTube, and it's a helpful tool for them. So we appreciate you so much, Carly, and especially taking your time out on this Saturday morning to do that. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Oh.
Thank you, Rolanda, and it was great to meet you. All right.
Well, enjoy the rest of your day.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.